Chapter 24 of Sisters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Sisters by Ada Cambridge. Chapter 24. Frances Ewing was a shady name thereafter to those in the know. Pennycuick blood and pride notwithstanding, she seemed to lose her own sustaining self-respect when she lost the respect of the man she loved, when he showed her with such barbarous and uncompromising candour the essential difference between a mistress and a wife. Of course, she got over that grievous affair, which, for a time, broke whatever heart she had to break. Her freedom and her money, her youth and her beauty were still hers, and she made the most of them, and that most was a great deal. In her cosmopolitan sets she was a popular and distinguished figure. From one fashionably rowdy continental resort to another she carried her rich jewels and trappings, and her personal magnetism, and sat down for the season to a campaign of social stratagem and sentimental intrigue, to the indulgence of her unbridled appetite for excitement and the admiration of men. And even at the end, when it was time to move on to another bejewelled apartment in another place, there was a fresh scalp at her girdle, and nothing, as it were, to show for it, until at last her vanity was tempted with a title, and she married an Italian count, who, if all tales were true, paid the debt that his sex owed her with heavy interest. But those tales did not reach the ears of the sisters at home. To them, with the object of suitably impressing them, she wrote an occasional note, of which half the words were titles of nobility, and the humbler relatives accepted the fact of her unapproachable elevation above them. The Breens made easy jokes upon the subject. Mr Goldsworthy's jealousy of her was overcome by his pride in the connection. "We had a letter from my sister-in-law, the Countess, the other day," he would amiably remark, and proceed to repeat and amplify the fashionable intelligence contained therein, instead of taking away her character as he had been used to do. Deborah was the only sister with whom she can be said to have corresponded, and Deborah had a shrewd suspicion that all was not gold that glittered in Francie's lot. Deborah had the best means of knowing, being herself a world traveller, and what is called a society woman, as well known in the resorts of such as Frances herself. But although they seemed to run so closely and so much upon the same lines, there was as wide a gap of social difference and non-intimacy between them as between any two of their family. And Deb was not one to think evil of her own flesh and blood, if it was possible to think good. She, too, might have filled her letters to Australia with titles of nobility of a firmer standing than the Countess and her friends could boast of, had she been inclined to do so. A baronial hall, dating from the Conquest, a ducal castle, not to speak of a royal presence chamber, was nothing to Deborah Pennycuick after a while. To see her on a crowded London staircase, laughing with a prince or a prime minister, was a common object of the season for a number of years, while varnishing days and first nights would have lacked charm for the society reporter who could not place her fine figure and her French gowns in his pictures of these scenes. Goodwood and Cowes were familiar with her striking face and her expert interest in horses and yachts. Highland shooting lodges, English hunting fields, claimed her for their own. Southern Europe, the Nile, Bayreuth, in short, wherever social life was bright, comfortable and select, there she turned up promiscuous, as the spirit moved her, to be welcomed open-armed as a matter of course. Men, young and old, continued to pay her homage, which was not just the sort of homage they paid to Frances. Proposals of marriage were, or might have been if not nipped in the bud, almost as plentiful as invitations to country houses in the autumn, and she relished it all with singular enjoyment, until she began to feel the approach of that winter and evening of life which has so sharp a chill for those who have loved the sun. Claud Dalzell was likewise a denizen of the great world that was hers and not Francie's, and, close corporation as it was, they were never far off each other's beat, seldom in ignorance of each other's whereabouts. At the same time, they also did not touch. It was known throughout the great world, which is so small, that there was a deadly feud between them, and tactful hostesses took pains not to bring them into juxtaposition. In public places, when meetings occurred by accident, only the most frigid bows were interchanged. For, in quite early times, when the Australian heiress, as she was improperly styled, was taking London more or less by storm, she chanced to overhear a brief colloquy not intended for her ears. "Who is that glorious woman that came in with the Duchess? I don't see her just now, but she had a red frock on, with black lace over it, dark hair, and diamond stars, not half as bright and fine as her eyes, by Jove!" "It must be Miss Pennycuick, an Australian lady. She is with the Duchess's party." "Oh, is that Miss Pennycuick? Well, now I can believe what I've heard of her being so charming. She carries it in her face." "She was charming, until she came into her money. That has quite spoiled her." It was Claud Dalzell who said it, and Deb heard him say it. She moved off out of the press that had brought her within reach of his cold voice, not to be mistaken by her for any other voice, and she vowed through clenched teeth that never again would she come within that distance of him, if she could help it. The years as they passed only strengthened this determination. Each proud inclination of the head, each ceremonious lift of the hat, added bitterness to their mutual resentment, to his feeling that she was spoiled by the money, and to her feeling that he wilfully misjudged her. The breach was widened by their unconcealed flirtations, a description mentally applied to the most ordinary man and woman acquaintanceships on either side, but not inappropriate in all cases. Claud ever loved the company of handsome women who appreciated him. Deb naturally inclined to nice men in preference to the nicest women, and each liked to show the other that he or she was still of high importance to somebody. Rumours of impending marriage were continually being wafted to his ears or hers, but nothing came of them. He was confirmed in luxurious bachelorhood. She was aware of many fortune hunters, and could not bring herself to value any of her disinterested suitors at the price of her freedom. So the one-time lovers drifted more and more apart, until somehow they lost sight of each other altogether, and meanwhile the years made them old without their knowing it. She was unreasonably upset on one occasion by the offer of a specific for grey hair from a fashionable London hairdresser. It was absolutely permanent, harmless and undetectable, he said. "But I am not grey," she indignantly informed him, whereupon she saw his keen professional eye wander about her brow as he murmured something about the faint